Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is all about classics I haven't read yet. Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list. There are hundreds, thousands, if not millions of classics out there. But it is the beginning of the school year for many, and that kind of made me a little bit nostalgic for my favorite subject in school, which was English. And I read so many amazing classics in elementary school, middle school, and high school that I inevitably went on to study it in college. So there is this affinity towards the classics. They have a very, very special place in my heart. So I figured I'd talk about 10 classics that I haven't read yet, but I definitely have my eyes on. So why don't we dive right in? The first book that I want to talk about is probably one of the more surprising titles that is on this list, and it is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. And that's because if anyone is subscribed to my channel, you will know that the Russians have a special place in my heart. The Russian classics, anything on Russia, just Russia in general. But I have yet to read Crime and Punishment. I've actually read two other books by Dostoevsky, Demons, which is a thick book. I read that for school for a seminar, and then also Notes from the Underground, from the Underground. And so I do know his writing and actually do enjoy it, but for whatever reason, I have yet to start and finish Crime and Punishment. So I am familiar with Dostoevsky's writing and actually enjoy it, but for whatever reason, I've just never gotten around to reading Crime and Punishment, and I certainly need to fix that. I do know that the main character, Raskolnikov, I believe, is someone who's committed murder and feels like no regret or remorse over it. And eventually, like, the voice of his conscience gets to him, and it's gonna be a dark, sort of seedy read from what I've gathered, which probably is one of the reasons I haven't picked it up readily, because I do feel like I have to be in a certain sort of mood for something that's gonna be so dark, and it does sound dark, because I think the other main character, who potentially is helping to redeem this individual, is a sex worker. So it's really dark, really seedy, kind of feels Dickensian, but it's Dostoevskian. So it is something I need to read. I do actually have a physical copy of it that I bought, I think last year, because I realized I didn't have a copy of it. So it's for sure on my TBR. I just don't know when I'm going to get to it. The next book is Beloved by Toni Morrison. And I read my first Toni Morrison book earlier this year during Black History Month. I read The Bluest Eye, and Beloved is, I feel like, the book that she is most famous for, and I believe it's won a Pulitzer. It's very, very famous, very, very highly regarded, and for whatever reason, I have just never gotten around to reading it. And I think part of that reason is because I actually had a number of friends in college who wrote their thesis for their honors degree on Beloved, or at least covered it to some extent. And so I feel like at this point I know what happens in the book, and it's kind of sort of been a little bit spoiled for me. So I do know that I need to read this book at some point. From what I do know, without giving any spoilers, the main character is a former slave, and she is haunted by her past and also by this angry ghost baby of hers, and the child has been buried nearby, and the only word on the gravestone is Beloved. And this is a book that is very gothic, and as I said, some of it has been spoiled for me by people writing about it as readily as they did in school, but it is a book that I really want to get to at some point, because I did enjoy The Bluest Eye, and Toni Morrison is Toni Morrison for a reason. Her writing is superb and spellbinding and just wow. So definitely need to get to this one. The next book is Middlemarch by George Eliot. And I don't know how this happened. Somehow, some way, despite my focus in college being Victorian literature, I didn't read a single George Eliot title. It boggles the mind. I honestly can't tell you how that happened. But of her titles, Middlemarch is the one that has always, like, grabbed my interest for some reason. And I think it's because what I've heard about the book is basically that it is a masterpiece. And it's also one of these books that is incredibly realistic in the way that it deals with sort of society and culture at the time, addressing things like the status of women, marriage as an institution, political reform, religion, etc., etc. Like, it goes in for them. And that's all stuff in, like, classics that I really enjoy. I love being able to really understand the society in which these books were written and how that impacted the book themselves. So I do feel like this is part social commentary, part classic, and so I'm really, really interested in it. I don't honestly know that much more about it, but of the George Eliot titles that I'm aware of, this is the one that has always piqued my interest. It is pretty chunky, if I remember rightly. I don't have a physical copy of it myself, but it's definitely a book that I want to get to sooner rather than later. Maybe it's a book that I'll read for Victober. Who knows? But yeah, that would be on my list. Anywho, moving right along, we have Armadale by Wilkie Collins, which was a title I had never heard of until I actually received it in my page 1 subscription box earlier this year. But let me tell you something. I am so intrigued by this book. It also, the edition I have, the Penguin Classic, has this, like, stunning painting on the cover. But from what I read about it, the character of Lydia in this book has been described as one of the most hardened female villains, like, in literature. And all I know about her is that she's a bigamist, a laudanum addict, and a husband poisoner. And considering this is a Victorian text and a sensation novel, I don't see this ending well for her. But part of me right now is still rooting for her. It sounds absolutely delicious. So this is one of the books that, again, is kind of on my tentative Victober TBR, because it is one that I think I would have a fabulous time with. The next classic is the Forsythe Saga by John Galsworthy, which I think is technically a trilogy, but I remember watching some, like, TV movie adaptation type thing of it on Netflix years ago, and it's a costume drama, so it had my interest straight away. But I love the fact that this is a family saga. It's following 3 generations of this Forsythe family, I think from, like, the 1880s into the early 1920s, and they are, like, this upper middle class Victorian family living in London, and just all the drama and intrigue that happens within this family. I think the original characters, the one in the first book, are a married couple, Soames and Irene, and I think potentially there is some marital discord and stuff that happens. I can't remember it with, like, a ton of clarity, but I just remember being really invested in the characters when I was watching the TV show. So I feel like this would be a great classic for me because there's already some sort of affinity and familiarity there. So this is one, I don't really hear that many people talk about it. Like, it doesn't seem to be one of the more popular classics out there, but I am certainly intrigued. as I am going through this list, I'm realizing how many Victorian classics are on here, but considering that was my interest in school, I'm not at all surprised. So the next one is also a Victorian classic, and it's North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. And again, this is one of these Victorian authors that I have somehow managed to not read a single book by, but North and South is one that I see people read every Victober. It's also a show on Netflix from several years ago, I believe. What's his name? Richard Armitage, is that his name? Is the main character, but it's about this young woman and her family who end up moving to the north in England to this industrial town of Milton, and her really grappling with what she considers the ugliness of this industrialized town and industrial way of life. And she kind of butts heads with the self-made man and owner of one of the cotton mills or something of that sort, but they also have some sort of romance in the TV show. So I'm kind of curious to see if that is actually part of the book itself. But again, this was a costume drama on Netflix, so it had my name written all over it, and I'd certainly be interested in reading the source material for that TV show with this book. So it is again another Victorian classic that I am very, very interested in. Next up, we have a book that isn't a Victorian classic. How about that? We have 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And this is a book that I think it was on a reading list at some point in either high school or in college, but it wasn't a book that I was able to get to. And it's one of those books that there's always a little bit of hesitation, because it's one of those classics that I think there is a very good chance that it's not for me. And I don't want to be that person, because I know that Gabriel Garcia Marquez is such a world famous and popular writer. And this book itself is about, I think, 7 generations of one particular family. So it is again another family saga, which I enjoy. I love those multi-generational stories, but this is sort of the book that put magical realism on the map. And magical realism and I don't always see eye to eye. I am very, very picky about it, and if it gets a little too magical and light on the realism, I tend to not enjoy the experience, which is why most fantasy books don't do it for me. But again, this is one of these classics that I do think is worth at least giving it a shot, because I've heard so many good things about it as well. I think the family, the solitude portion of it is that the patriarch of this family ends up creating a town somewhere that's supposed to be isolated from others or something like that. I don't really know, but yeah, it's a book that I definitely think is worth me reading at some point. But as I said, it does give me pause. This is one that I am very, very nervous about, for sure. Okay, I'm sorry. Going back to another Victorian classic with The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, which I think this is another one of the titles on this list that is most surprising to me personally that I haven't read yet, because I have read other books by Oscar Wilde and really enjoy his writing style. This is a famous, famous, famous book. The character Dorian Gray has appeared in all sorts of movies and television shows. I know he was a character in Penny Dreadful, a TV series that I adore. I think he was in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen from ages ago. He pops up regularly in pop culture. But Dorian Gray is a young man who sells his soul in order to be young and beautiful forever. And it's a very short book. I think it's technically a novella, and all about, I guess, his moral degeneration or disintegration. And there's something about it that I think I will be particularly drawn to. I honestly have never heard anyone say anything bad about this book either, so it's definitely one that I want to get to, and I do own a physical copy of it already, so this is one that I need to move up that ever-growing TBR list and get to sooner rather than later. But I do really think this is a book that I will enjoy. I think it's probably a 5-star read for me, just from what I do know about Oscar Wilde and the subject matter. So, yeah. Next, we have For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. And this is I would consider it a modern classic. It's written in the 20th century, I think in the 1930s, several years after Ernest Hemingway had gone to Spain and basically been involved and witnessed the Spanish Civil War. And this is a book about the Spanish Civil War. The main character is an American who's there, and I believe he's part of like an anti-fascist guerrilla unit where he's a dynamiter. But it is a story about all of that, and also this like romance between him and this woman, Maria. And I don't really know much more than that. I have seen a movie adaptation of this. I believe it's with Ingrid Bergman, and I know that I ugly sobbed while watching that movie. So I have a feeling that this is going to be very, very tragic, and that I will ugly sob while reading the book. So it is a modern classic that I want to get to. I haven't read all that much Ernest Hemingway. He's definitely an author that I'd be interested in reading more of, but I do feel like this is one of his like more famous and most read titles, and for whatever reason I never had to read it in school. And I do actually have a physical copy of it, so I would like to get to it at some point. And lastly, we have Orlando by Virginia Woolf. Now, I've spoken about how I have yet to read Mrs. Dalloway on this channel, and it's definitely another classic that I am very interested in reading. However, Orlando has now moved up on my list of classics that I need to read because I recently watched, I think it's called Virginia and Vita? Yes, I believe it's called Virginia and Vita, which is this like historical biographical type movie with Gemma Arterton and also the girl who's now going to be playing Princess Diana in The Crown. Her, whoever she is. I am really bad at remembering things right now. Oh my goodness. But I watched the movie, and it's about Virginia Woolf and Vita and their relationship, and they are both writers. They became lovers, and apparently Orlando is inspired by Vita. And just from watching that movie, I was really, really intrigued by what this book was going to be about, because it's this character, but I think he goes across like 300 years or something, and I have no idea how that actually works, but I am very curious now, having watched that movie, about the book and about Virginia Woolf and Vita, who's, if I haven't said her full name, it's Vita Saxville West. So I'm very, very curious about it. The movie definitely made me want to prioritize Virginia Woolf in the coming months. I really, really, really need to read Mrs. Dalloway, but I also really, really, really need to read Orlando because it does sound very, very bizarre. I don't actually know how all the pieces fit together, but I am here for it. What I do know about it makes it sound really appealing. But yeah, those are 10 classic books that I haven't read yet, but that I am certainly interested in reading. Hopefully I slid a few lesser known titles in there that you can add to your physical TBR. I know that some of them are quite popular and so they're unoriginal, but hey, that's what I'm interested in reading. In any case, I do hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.